Simon Cowell's hand was hovering over the X. He hadn't pressed it, not yet. But his patience was gone. It was 9:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. This was the third day of auditions in Pasadena, and the machine was starting to wear everyone down. The audience was tired, the crew was tired, and Simon Cowell, was bored. He was bored in a way that only a man who has seen 20 magic acts fail before lunch can be bored. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a search for one single original moment in a sea of mediocrity. And the man on stage, David Chamberlain, was not that moment. The machine was running at full power. The Pasadena Civic Auditorium was a universe of manufactured starlight. Sapphire blue beams sliced through theatrical fog, catching particles of dust that danced like tiny nervous stars. The enormous, glowing AGT logo pulsed behind the stage like a digital heartbeat. The air, thick with the scent of ozone, popcorn, and a faint collective perfume of 3,000 strangers, vibrated with a kinetic, almost painful anticipation. This wasn't just a TV show. It was an industry. It was an arena. It was the place where ordinary people came to be anointed or annihilated, all in the space of 90 seconds. The judges' table was the high altar. Howie Mandel, ever the court jester, was playfully bantering with a woman in the front row, his bald head gleaming under the hot lights. Heidi Klum and Sofia Vergara, luminous under the key lights, provided the glamour and warmth that balanced the room, their laughter echoing through their microphones. And then, in the center, there was Simon. He'd just endured a 40-person interpretive dance troupe called Rhythms of the Soil that had earned his first red buzzer of the night. Utterly chaotic, he'd called it, his voice a bored drawl, like my dog's trying to escape a bath. The audience booed, he smirked, and the great unforgiving machine moved on. The stagehands, dressed in ninja-like black, cleared the stage with terrifying efficiency. Terry Crews, a mountain of charisma, gave the next introduction from the wings. Next up, the announcer's voice boomed, we have David Chamberlain. The applause was polite, standard, the kind reserved for an act no one has any expectations for. The stage doors opened, and out walked the most aggressively normal man of the night. David Chamberlain looked to be in his early 50s. He wasn't flashy. He wore no sequins, no eyeliner, no top hat, just a simple black waistcoat over a crisp white shirt, his graying hair neatly parted. He looked less like a Vegas illusionist and more like a suburban father chaperoning a high school dance. He carried a small, velvet-covered table, which he placed center stage with an almost reverent care. His hands, his only tools, were steady as he set it down. Simon sighed. It was a small, barely audible huff, but it was picked up by his microphone. He leaned over to Howie, shielding his mouth. Oh, brilliant. Card trick, just what the world needs. David stood at his table, his smile brittle, stretched tight across his face. He was visibly sweating, the lights turning his forehead into a mirror. Good evening, judges. My name is David Chamberlain, and I'm a close-up magician. And what's the dream, David? Howie asked, leaning in, already setting up a punchline. The dream, David paused. His eyes darted to the vast, dark ocean of the audience, a faceless monster in the black. The dream is just to be here, to do this, tonight. A man of mystery, Howie smiled, playing to the crowd. Well, good luck, Simon said, his tone flat, already checking out. The stage is yours. The music started, a generic pulsing track designed to build suspense where there was none. David, to his credit, seemed to gain a bit of confidence as he fell back on his training. His movements at first were professional. He took a deck of cards from his waistcoat pocket and fanned them beautifully, a perfect smooth cascade. Magic isn't about deception, David began, his voice amplified, gaining a bit of theatrical rhythm. It's about focus. It's about taking something ordinary and making you see it in an extraordinary way. He walked, a bit stiffly, over to the judge's table. Sophia, if you would, please, he said, his voice a little too loud. Just touch the back of any card you like, anywhere at all. Sophia, smiling, reached out a perfectly manicured hand and tapped a card near the center. Excellent. David separated the card from the deck, holding it up so only she and the other judges could see. The Queen of Hearts. Please, confirm for everyone. It's the Queen of Hearts, Sophia announced, her voice sparkling. Wonderful. Now, Sophia, I'll need your signature. Just right across the face of the card. Don't be shy. A stagehand, anticipating the move, handed her a black marker. She scribbled Sophia V in a big looping script and handed it back. David showed the signed card to the camera, then slipped it, with deliberate, almost painful fairness, into the middle of the deck. Now, David, Simon interrupted, his patience gone. Are you going to find the card, or is the card going to find you? Because we're all getting older here, and I'm genuinely not sure I'll make it to the end of this. A few audience members laughed. David flinched, but plastered his smile back on. I am, Simon, David said, a bead of sweat now visible on his temple. As I was saying, it's about focus. The hand is quicker than the eye. He shuffled the deck. Once. Twice. A clean, professional riffle shuffle. He cut the deck. He squared it up, tapping it neatly on the velvet table. He was doing everything right. Technically, he was perfect. And now, David said, his voice suddenly a little thinner, losing its fake bravado. The reveal. He held the deck in his left hand, his thumb poised on the edge. He prepared to do a fan or a spring, some flourish that would produce the signed card, perhaps on top of the deck, perhaps from his pocket, and nothing. He just stopped. His right hand, which had been poised to move, to snap, to reveal, simply froze in mid-air a few inches from the deck. It hung there, suspended, a strange, five-fingered claw. The music track continued to pulse for another 5, 10, 15 seconds. It was a ridiculous driving beat over a scene of absolute terrifying stillness. David's eyes were glued to the back of the cards in his other hand. His smile was gone, replaced by a mask of sudden vacant horror. He wasn't just nervous, he was gone. In the control booth, a producer, a young woman named Jess, slammed her hand on the console. Fade the music! Fade it! Get a tight shot on his face! The music died, plunging the auditorium into a shocking, agonizing silence. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning. This was the moment. The rhythm of the entire $100 million production broke. David Chamberlain did not move. He didn't drop the cards. He didn't shake. He didn't cry. He just wasn't there. He was a statue on the stage, his hands still hovering, his body locked in a rictus of panic. The audience, at first confused, began to murmur. A nervous titter of laughter started in the balcony. Was this part of the act? A joke? Howie Mandel, sensing a train wreck, leaned into his mic, his voice laced with nervous comedy. Is this the trick, David? The world's slowest magician? Are we supposed to fall asleep and then you put the card on us? Because it's working. The joke fell into the void. David didn't even flinch. He didn't seem to hear it. His world had shrunk to the deck of cards in his hand. Simon Cowell, who had been leaning back in his chair, slowly sat up. This was the shift. He wasn't annoyed anymore. He wasn't bored. He was transfixed. He saw what the cameras from a distance couldn't. He saw what the other judges, busy being entertainers, missed. He saw the man's eyes. They were wide, but they weren't looking at the cards. They were looking through them. The man was not in Pasadena. He was somewhere else, somewhere terrible. This wasn't a forgotten line. This wasn't a mistake. This was a human being coming apart at the seams, live on television. David, Simon said. His voice was quiet, not a judgment, but a query. It cut through the tension like a scalpel. David's breathing was audible now on his microphone, short, sharp, shallow gasps. His hand, still frozen, began to twitch, not a tremor, but a small, spasmodic clenching and unclenching. "Sir, you have to get off the stage," a stage manager yelled from the wings, his voice low but frantic. "We have to go to commercial. Get him off." The stage manager's voice finally broke the spell. David flinched, a full-body jolt, as if waking from a nightmare. He looked up from the cards, his face a landscape of absolute crushing humiliation. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, clicking sound came out. He finally whispered. He dropped the cards, They didn't explode in a flourish, they just fell. They clattered onto his small table and then spilled onto the floor. A river of red and black, with Sophia's sign, Queen of Hearts, landing face up at his feet, a stark, smiling mockery of his failure. He had failed, utterly, publicly, irrevocably. I'm sorry, David stammered, his voice cracking. He looked at the judges, his eyes swimming in tears of shame. I'm so sorry, I can't. He turned, defeated, and began to shuffle off the stage, his shoulders slumped, a man escaping the scene of his own psychological death. Stop! It was Simon. His voice wasn't loud, but it had the authority of a thunderclap. It stopped David, it stopped the stage manager, it stopped the producers in the booth. David froze, his back to the judges. Turn around, David. Just turn around. Come back. Slowly, agonizingly, as if walking to his own execution, David turned. He was openly crying now, tears of shame streaming down his face, cutting through the stage makeup he'd been forced to wear. The audience was silent, horrified, and deeply, deeply uncomfortable. This was no longer entertainment. This was watching a man unravel. This was the climax, the empathy point. Simon Cowell looked at the broken man on his stage. He didn't look at the other judges. He didn't look at the audience. He just focused on David, creating an invisible, protective bubble around the two of them. His voice, when he spoke, was stripped of all sarcasm, all judgment. It was just human. What just happened, David? He asked, not as a judge, but as a witness. I don't... David tried to speak. He gestured helplessly at his own hands, holding them up as if they were foreign objects, as if they were covered in blood. They stopped. They wouldn't listen. Why? Simon pressed, his gaze softening. He could see this man was on a precipice. Why did you come here? You seemed terrified before you even began. I had to, David choked out. I had to see if they still worked. A wave of confusion washed over the judge's table. See if they still worked? Heidi asked gently. What do you mean? David looked down at his hands, clenching and unclenching them. I'm not a magician, he said. The confession hung in the air, a second, more powerful silence. I mean, I am, he stammered, but it's not what I do. It's not who I am. Then who are you, David? Simon asked, his voice low and inviting, a lifeline. David took a shuddering breath. He looked past the lights, past the cameras, as if speaking to someone in the rafters, a ghost only he could see. I was a surgeon, a pediatric surgeon. A collective, audible gasp sucked the air out of the room. Sofia Vergara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Howie, for the first time, all night was speechless, his jaw literally open. Simon Cowell's face changed. The hard lines of the critic dissolved. He understood. He understood pressure. He understood what it meant for your hands to be your life. I was in practice for 25 years, David continued, the words tumbling out of him now, a dam of grief breaking. My hands, they were good. They saved lives. And then 2 years ago, he stopped. He couldn't say it. His body was racked with a sob. It's all right, Simon said, his voice a low murmur. You're safe. What happened? A little girl, David whispered. Her name was Emily. Emily Rose, 6 years old, a routine heart procedure, a septal defect. Simple. I'd done hundreds of them, and I don't know what happened. I was in, and I froze, just like this. He held up his right hand, still trembling. My hands, they just stopped. In the middle of the operation. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just watched. The horror of his words settled on the room, a physical weight. We lost her, David said, his voice breaking completely. On the table, it was my fault. My hands, they killed her. He was sobbing now, a deep, guttural, racking sound that was utterly out of place in the glittering cathedral of television. I haven't been in an operating room since. I was sued. I lost my license. I lost everything. I took up magic. I took it up, he said, looking at his hands with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, to try and to try and teach them to work again, to prove to myself they weren't they weren't killers, that I could still control them. This, he gestured to the fallen cards, this was supposed to be the test. If I could do this, maybe I wasn't a monster. He had come to the biggest stage in the world not to win, but to seek absolution, and he had failed in front of millions. Simon Cowell stood up. The audience, the crew, the other judges, everyone watched as he walked from behind the glowing desk. He didn't stride, he didn't rush. He walked slowly, deliberately, up the small set of stairs and onto the stage. He broke the barrier between judge and contestant, between power and vulnerability. David flinched, as if expecting to be physically removed. Simon stopped a few feet from him. He didn't touch him. He just stood there, meeting the man's gaze. "David," Simon said, his voice now amplified by David's own microphone, carrying to every corner of the globe. "Look at me." David, weeping, forced his eyes up. "Your hands didn't kill anyone," Simon said, with a certainty that was absolute. "Your hands saved hundreds of children. You said it yourself. But I froze. You are not a magician," Simon continued, cutting him off gently, his voice firm but kind. "You're a man who is carrying a weight that is too heavy for any one person to hold. You came here to fix your hands." Simon paused, letting the words land. "Your hands aren't what's broken." David looked at him, confused. His tears momentarily stopped. "Your heart is," Simon said softly, "and you are allowed to be broken." Simon took a step closer. "What you did for 25 years, that was the real magic. The courage it took to hold a child's heart in your hands day after day. That is a level of courage I have never seen on this stage. This," he gestured to the fallen cards, "this is just a deck of cards. It doesn't mean anything." "I failed," David whispered, ashamed. "No," Simon said, his voice full of a sudden fierce empathy. "You didn't. You just need to heal. You have nothing to prove. Not to us, not to anyone, and certainly not," he said, tapping his own chest, "with a card trick. He didn't hit a golden buzzer. He didn't ask for a vote. He broke every rule of his own format." "Thank you for coming, David," Simon said. He reached out and, for just a second, gripped the man's shoulder. "Thank you for telling us the truth. Now go home, and please be kind to yourself." The resolution was as quiet as the failure. Simon walked with David for a few steps before letting Terry Crews, who was standing in the wings with tears streaming down his face, gently guide the man backstage. Simon returned to his desk. He sat down. The studio was in a state of stunned, reverent silence. No one knew what to do. The other judges were visibly weeping. Sophia was quietly sobbing into a tissue. Howie, for once, had nothing to say. He just stared at the empty stage. Simon cleared his throat. He looked at the audience, his own eyes glistening. "Right," he said, his voice thick. We'll take a break." The aftermath of that moment changed the season. The producers, in a decision of remarkable bravery, aired the entire segment, unedited. The failure, the breakdown, the confession, they didn't use it as a cheap emotional ploy. They presented it with the same quiet respect Simon had shown on stage. It became the most talked about clip of the year. It wasn't about fame or talent. It was about trauma, mental health, and the crushing burden of perfection. It sparked a national conversation. Support groups for medical professionals, first responders, and anyone dealing with PTSD from their work flooded with new members. The segment was shared by doctors, nurses, and surgeons around the world who said, "He is all of us." David Chamberlain never returned to surgery. He didn't need to. 3 months after the audition aired, he gave a TED Talk, not about magic, but about his experience. He spoke about the moment the hands freeze and the psychological toll of a career where the stakes are life and death. He started a foundation, the Emily Rose Foundation, for medical professionals dealing with trauma, loss, and burnout. His failure on that stage had in the end become his new purpose. He was saving lives again, just not with his hands. The show, the machine, moved on. There were other acts, other buzzers, other winners, but everyone who was in the building that night was irrevocably changed. It was the only act in America's Got Talent history to receive a standing ovation for failing, because that night Simon Cowell didn't judge a performance. He saw a man, and he reminded him how to be human.